Hello Year 8. So today's lesson is about pollution, and the learning objective today: identify different types of pollution, describe how human activities cause pollution, explain how pollution affects living things. So as per usual, when you see the pen, you write down that information because it's important. Pencil and ruler, you would complete the table or diagram, and when you hear me say pause or you see the pause icon, that's when you pause the video and complete the task. So pollution, we're going to look at 5 types of pollution today. So the first one is water pollution. Now, water pollution isn't just dirty water. It's lots of things within the water. So you can see this one, there's lots of litter on the surface of the water, but it's chemicals in the water as well. And we don't just get water pollution in areas where you see something like that. Water pollution happens in rivers and lakes and the oceans, and it happens all over the place. So it's a really big problem. Air pollution. Now, this is obviously a factory which is burning some fuels, so you can see the pollution going into the air, but we can't forget that air pollution is also caused by cars. You can't see the pollution coming out the back, so it's caused when we're in our homes and we're using electricity and gas that is being generated, and that's burning fossil fuels, which is causing air pollution as well. This one here is noise pollution. So low flying planes. So some people who live under a flight path will be able to hear planes. And noise pollution is a real issue, especially for animals who are used to a quieter environment. But number 4 is light pollution. Now, if you've ever travelled in anywhere on a plane, or if you go to the top of a hill on an evening, you can see the towns and cities are lit up, and that's because of all the light that's coming from homes and from office buildings and street lights and cars, and that means that we can't see the night sky, and that's going to affect animals as well, because when it should be dark, it's actually quite light. And the final one is soil pollution. So soil pollution is essentially pollution that takes place on the land. So this can be at landfill sites, this can be in fields and areas around where you live, but it's anything that's causing pollution and damage to the land. So what I'd like you to do is just pause the video here and get down those 5 different types of pollution. Okay, so next thing I want you to do is I'm going to ask you to pause the video and copy this table down, and I'm going to then go through with you some of the ways that human activities can cause pollution. So what I want you to do here is pause the video, and with a pencil and ruler, can you please copy down this table? So we're going to look at the human activities that cause the different types of pollution. So you should have drawn this table out, so it's going to make it easier for you to get this information down. If you haven't, what I suggest you do is you pause here, go back to the previous slide and get the table copied down. So first of all, water pollution. Okay, so one of the main causes of water pollution is fertilizers. Now, these are what farmers put on their crops to help their crops grow, but then as it rains, all of the excess fertilizers run off into the rivers and lakes, and they cause algae, which is a plant that we've looked at in a previous lesson. They cause that to grow, and then that blocks all the light from getting to any plants underneath. So fertilizers cause a lot of water pollution. Acid rain. Okay, now acid rain is caused by the burning of fossil fuels. And just to remind us, fossil fuels are coal, oil and gas, and as they burn, they produce carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxides, and these combine with water in the clouds and fall as acid rain, and they fall into rivers and lakes. So there's also the physical pollution in the form of litter. And there's lots and lots of litter in rivers and lakes, but there's loads of litter actually in the seas and oceans, and that's what the animals are getting caught up in. They're eating it, they're getting caught in it, they're unable to swim, they're unable to do their things, and they're dying as a result of that. Also, things that can get into the local water are chemicals from your home. So for example, bleach. So bleach is great for cleaning products around, for cleaning away microbes, bacteria and viruses around your home, but also if that then gets into the water, that can cause harm to the natural bacteria that we find, the harmless bacteria that we find in the water, and that will affect the food chains of your local water source. Okay, so air pollution. So this is going to be caused by the fuel in cars and other vehicles. So lorries and motorbikes, etc. Burning of fossil fuels. So that's in order to generate electricity in our homes, whether that's in factories, whether that's to power trains to go up and down the country. Anytime we're burning fossil fuels, we're releasing carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxides. Okay, and these are actually going into the air, as well as things like carbon particulates, which is a smog, which is a layer that you get over cities, and that blocks out some of the natural light and causes problems to people with asthma as well, breathing difficulties. So we're going to have things like burning waste as well. So any of you that travel up the M5 or live in Gloucester, you'll know there's a big incinerator, which is a fancy word for burning. And that's where lots of waste goes to be burnt, because we haven't got space for it in landfill, and that releases lots of nasty chemicals into the air. Okay, so noise pollution. So planes going overhead, nice and quiet at the moment. We haven't got all the planes going overhead, causing all the noise pollution. So cars and other road vehicles. Going up and down the roads, especially on the motorways, when they're going quite fast, they make a lot more noise. Trains, if you live near a train line, you'll know that they're quite noisy as they go past you. And things like factories, depending on what it is that they're doing, whether they're building things in the factories, whether there's machinery in the factories, they're going to be causing a lot of noise pollution. Okay, so light pollution, we've got things like street lights. Any of you that have travelled into the UK on an aeroplane, you'll be able to see that you can see huge patches of the UK that are lit up at night time, and that's because of street lights as well as domestic lights, lights in homes, lights in offices, etc. So vehicle lights, so lights on cars, on motorbikes, house lights, and planes and airports, because they have to be lit up all the time so the planes can see where it is that they need to land. But all of these things are meaning that we don't get the same level of darkness that we should get and that animals are used to. Okay, so soil pollution, last one. Litter, a huge one. You just have to walk down the street and you'll see some form of litter, and that's going to go somewhere, and it ends up in the soil. If it's picked up and put in a bin, it ends up in a landfill, which is a huge place where everybody's rubbish goes to, and that landfill will cause damage to the soil around it. So chemicals in factories and homes. So these leak into the soil and mean that plants can't grow in the soil because they're missing the necessary nutrients. And farming. So farmers spray their crops with herbicides that kill other plants, and those might get into, so they're going to kill the weeds, but they're also then going to get into the soil and they're going to prevent other things from growing. So farming, not only do they spray other chemicals as well as the fertilizers, and what this does is it harms the water, but it also harms the soil as well. So what I suggest you do is, if you haven't managed to get that down while I've been talking, I suggest you pause the video and go back and get each of those things down into your table. Okay. Okay, so we're going to look in detail now about how those different types of pollution will actually affect living things. So first of all, looking at water pollution. Now, water pollution, this is an example of litter on the surface of a lake, but water pollution can also happen in the oceans, and animals can get caught in the litter. So this here is a sea turtle, and it's been caught in a ring pool, and you can see that actually as it's grown, its shell hasn't formed properly because it's being restricted by this plastic can container. Light can be blocked out, so plants below the surface, so they cannot photosynthesize. So if you think, for example, about the plants below the surface of this lake, they're not going to be getting the light. If they're not doing photosynthesis, then the oxygen is not being supplied to the water, which means that everything else isn't going to be able to respire and survive in there. And very quickly, the food chain falls apart. Animals and other plants will die as well. The chemicals in the water could make it unsafe for animals to drink. So, for example, sewage. So, especially in some coastal regions around the edge of countries, sewage that's been treated, and so all the harmful things removed for it so that we have the water that's safe to drink, that then gets into other water supplies, and that makes it unsafe to drink. Some of the chemicals can come from the farmland as well, but quite a lot of it will come from sewage. Chemicals kill fish and plants in the water, which affect the food chain. So if one part of the food chain is affected, other parts are affected, and we know that from looking at food chains. So that's water pollution. Okay, animals also lose their habitats. So air pollution. So carbon dioxide increases the greenhouse effect. Now we're going to look at the greenhouse effect in a couple of lessons' time when we look at climate change, but essentially what it does is it blocks the heat, the energy from the sun, leaving the earth, and therefore it gets warmer. It creates like a blanket layer on the outside of the earth, so the increase in the global temperature. Smog or carbon particles can make it difficult to breathe, especially in cities. So people who suffer from asthma are going to find this especially difficult, but it also affects animals as well, because there's particles in the air which shouldn't be in the air, and they're being breathed in. So a layer of pollution can block light from the sun. Now, if you look on the outside of some cities, they've got a layer, which means that natural light can't get in, but it also means that air itself is difficult to breathe. Can cause acid rain, which falls in rivers and lakes. So as we've looked at, so the burning of fossil fuels, that causes acid rain, that falls into rivers and lakes. It's going to kill fish, it's going to kill plants, which means that the food chain is going to be affected. So noise pollution. Bird songs cannot be heard. Now, I don't know how often you hear bird song or you hear the birds singing, but obviously if you're living somewhere noisier, you're going to get less birds and you're not going to hear those bird songs, which means those birds aren't communicating with other birds, and that's going to affect their ability to mate, communicate with the chicks that they've got in the nest. The partner birds aren't going to be able to communicate with each other. Animals are driven out of their habitats due to loud noises. So animals quite like to live in quiet places. So if a place gets very noisy, some animals won't be able to live there, and they'll be driven out of those habitats and have to go and find somewhere else to live. Prey cannot detect predators, so food chains are affected. So if an animal is prey, it has a fantastic sense of hearing. But if there's noise pollution, that's going to affect its ability to be able to detect the predator, which means it's more likely to be killed. So therefore, the numbers of prey will decrease faster than they should do naturally. In the oceans, this can affect the ability of whales and dolphins to communicate and meet for mating. So dolphins and whales use something called ultrasound to communicate over miles. They communicate over massive distances so they can meet up, mate, and reproduce. Now, obviously, there's fishing boats, there's other kind of cruise ships in the ocean, and they're creating noise, and that's affecting the ability of these animals to communicate with each other. Okay, and there's other animals that communicate as well, and any noise will affect. So light pollution. So light pollution will affect nocturnal animals, so animals that sleep in the day. So if they'd normally sleep in the day and the day is longer because the night doesn't exist, because there's artificial, so fake light all the time, they're going to have their sleep patterns affected. So the bat is an example of a nocturnal animal. So it sleeps in the day, they come out at night and they hunt their prey. So prey are exposed to predators in artificial light. So it's much harder for prey to get around and find food because they're more likely to be killed by predators. Animals that hunt at night cannot do so as easily. So the bat, who would normally hunt at night, there's going to be less prey out because they are going to find themselves exposed, which is going to be harder then for the predators to find them as well, which will disrupt the food chain. Brighter beaches in holiday resorts discourage nesting of sea turtles. So sea turtles come out of the sea, they lay their eggs on beaches in quiet places, dark places, and then they swim back out to sea. The turtles hatch and they make their own way back out to sea. But if there isn't a quiet, dark place for them to lay their eggs, they won't do, which means their numbers will decrease and they are becoming endangered. So bioluminescent animals. So these are animals that produce their own light, and they do this to move around and communicate in very dark parts of the ocean. So here's an example of an animal that does that. But when there's artificial light, they're not going to be able to, so they're not going to be able to attract mates in order to be able to reproduce. The last one, soil pollution. So animals can get caught in litter, same as they do in the ocean. So similar sort of thing, these ring pools. This is a hedgehog and it's got itself stuck in this. And easy thing for us to do is not use them in the first place, but also you can cut them up before you throw them away so animals don't get caught up in them. Chemicals can leak into the soil, so plants cannot grow. So harmful chemicals in things like batteries and in some of the waste that we throw away, if that leaks into the soil, the plants can't grow there because they don't have the right nutrients that they need. Habitats are destroyed by the litter, so people putting litter in something called fly tipping, where they put it where it shouldn't be. That destroys habitats, but also huge dumps and landfill sites like the one in the picture. That's obviously destroying a habitat for some animals. Diseases can spread easily when there's lots of waste and there's lots of rubbish. Things are going to be able to be passed easily. Animals will come in here looking for scraps of food, but that food might not be very safe for them to eat. They can get unwell and they can spread diseases really easily. And animals can ingest or eat the litter and it can get stuck inside them and they can die from that as well. So progress check time. So what you need to do is write down 1 to 7 in your books, and you're going to pause the video and answer these questions. So what are the 5 types of pollution? How do humans cause water pollution? How do humans cause noise pollution? What effect does light pollution have on nocturnal animals? What's the main problem with litter in the water? How can noise pollution affect prey? And what happens if light is blocked out of water habitats? So write down your answers, pause in the video. Okay, so let's go through the answers. 5 types of pollution: water, air, noise, light and soil. Any order doesn't matter. How do humans cause water pollution? Sewage, fertilizers, chemicals in the home or industry. How do humans cause noise pollution? Cars, planes, other traffic, homes, factories, trains, roadworks, anything else you can think of that makes noise where it shouldn't be. What effect does light pollution have on nocturnal animals? They're unable to hunt or get food in the same way, and it affects their sleeping/waking patterns. What's the main problem with litter in the water? Animals get caught in it and it blocks light from getting to plants below. How can noise pollution affect prey? So they're unable to hear predators. And what happens if light is blocked out of water habitats? So plants cannot photosynthesize, so they can't make oxygen, so the animals in there don't have oxygen to respire, so therefore they die out as well. Okay, so deliberate practice time. So what you need to do is pause the video and answer this question. And you're going to pause the video and answer this question. Going to pause the video and answer this question. And pausing the video and answering this question. And then I will go through the answers. So we're going to review the questions from the deliberate practice. So first of all, question 1, changes to the environment sometimes harm plants or animals? Use only the words in the list below to fill the gaps in the sentences. You may use some of the words more than once. You do not need to use all the words. Okay, so first one, rivers may be polluted by, so this is going to be fertilizers and sewage. So fertilizers and sewage. River pollution harms and sometimes kills. So it's going to be fish, definitely, because they're going to live in there. And it's going to be insects, because they live in the water as well. Hedges may be dug up to make more farmland. Digging up hedges destroys homes of some birds because they nest in the hedges, and insects. Okay, so question number 2. This is linking back to the work we've done on food chains as well, so it's good to see if you've remembered this stuff. So drawing shows part of a farmland food chain. So we've got plant, we've got a partridge, which is a kind of short flightless bird, and then we've got a fox. Partridges feed mainly on insects and wild plants, so weeds. Some farmers spray their crops with chemicals to kill the insects and weeds. How would this affect the number of foxes? So they would decrease. And why? And that's going to be because there's going to be less partridges to eat. Some farmers may leave a strip of land around the edge of their farmland, which they do not spray with chemicals. Suggest 2 reasons why this would lead to an increase in the number of partridges on these farms. So one of them would be they would have insects to eat, and the other place they would have nesting sites or places, so they're going to nest around the outside as well. Okay, so question 3, looking at acid rain. So burning fossil fuels causes air pollution. Burning fossil fuels leads to the formation of acid rain. Acid rain has collected in this lake. So there's a lake there, and what's happening is there's a helicopter actually dropping some calcium hydroxide. That's going to neutralise that, but we're not going to cover that in this lesson. What effect does acid rain have on plants and animals in the lake? So it's going to, it kills them. The photograph below shows trees damaged by acid rain. The trees have lost their leaves and have died. Explain why leaves are needed for a tree to grow. Because they need it for photosynthesis. Plants absorb sunlight in their leaves, okay, and that's where photosynthesis takes place. The drawing shows a horseshoe bat. How are horseshoe bats affected by light pollution? So a couple of keywords to include in here. So bats are nocturnal. So they're the ones that they sleep in the day and they come out at night. So bats are nocturnal, so they hunt their prey at night. So if there's going to be light pollution, this means there's going to be less prey out at night because the night is shorter. Or in some cases non-existent night. Okay, and it will also affect their sleeping patterns. Because they would normally sleep for a certain period of time, but if it's lighter when it shouldn't be, they're not going to know when they should be asleep and when they should be awake. So marking your work, well done.